Hello and welcome to the next in the series of presentations for the Introduction to Linguistics seminar. This week we're going to continue looking at the syllable, and this time we're going to concentrate on the consonant clusters you can find in onsets and codas, and we'll also look at how we combine syllables in words when we have multi-syllabic words. Now let's just have a quick reminder of what we've said so far. This is the structure we've proposed for the syllable. The syllable, that sigma sign at the top of this diagram here, is made up of two things. One is an optional thing, the onset. That's what the brackets around that onset mean. It's optional, you don't have to have an onset, but there can be one. And that onset is made up of either one or two or three consonants. And then also inside the syllable we've got this obligatory element, the rhyme. And the rhyme itself is made up of two things. It's made up of an obligatory nucleus, which is typically a vowel, but it can be a sonorant consonant under certain circumstances. The second thing is, again, it's an optional thing. You don't have to have it, but you can. We call that the coda, and again, that's made up of 1 to 3 consonants. Okay, so now let's look at onsets in a little more detail. Most consonants in English can count as onsets. However, there are some restrictions. For example, the consonants h, w, y, and r in certain accents, i.e. the British English one mainly. These sounds can only be onsets. You never get them in coda positions. However, there's one consonant, the n, the velar nasal, that can never be an onset. So there are restrictions, some at least, on what can count as an onset. But there are even more restrictions than just that when we start looking at what can be actually combined in a cluster of consonants in the onset. And this is a little bit more involved, as we'll see. Okay, let's first of all start by considering what kinds of consonants can be combined in an onset cluster. First of all, starting with two consonants. The first thing we'll do this kind of systematically. Let's start with the bilabials, the outside part of the oral tract, and we've got p and b, which can be combined with l and r. So as in plea and black and pray and brown. Note, however, l and r are approximants, but you can't get a p or a b followed by a w in English. There's no pw or bw words in English. We won't consider here the y approximant, because we've seen that when that enters into consonant clusters in the onset, it's very restricted and can only appear with certain vowels, and that probably indicates that there's something else is going on there. So we'll just ignore that as a possibility. But with p and b, you can get l and r, but not w following it. So basically we've got a plosive, either a voiced or a voiceless plosive, followed by an approximant. Going slightly further back with the labiodental th, that can be followed again by an approximant, the l and the r, but again not the w. And this time, however, the voiced version isn't possible either with l or r. So whereas you can get flow and from, there's no vl or vr words in English that are, well, English words. Obviously there are things like Vladimir, but that's hardly an English word. Then the dentals. Again, we've got a fricative here, and to some extent you can see that that is similar to th, in as much as you can get the voiceless th, this time with a w or a r, as in thwart or throw, but you can't get a th in front of a w or a r. Okay, so there's no v words or vr words. S, again, fairly similar. You can get s in front of a w or a l, but no z in front of a w or a l. So there's zw or zl words. Sh, exactly the same. Sh, you can get it in front of a r, obviously, with shred. You can sort of get it in front of a w or a l, but again, these tend to be rather foreign origin words, so schwa and schlepp. Schwa is coming from German, and schlepp is from Yiddish, which also comes from German, so the schl kind of and schw sounds not exactly English, but more German. But no, there's no j in front of a l or a r, so there's no zr words. Coming back now to a plosive, the alveolar plosive t and d can get it in front of w or r, but not in front of a l. So where there's twig and dwell and try and dry, there's no dl or tl words. And finally, the velar plosives, k and g, you can find those in front of w, l, or r. So any of those approximants, queen and gwen, clue and glue, cry and great. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any restriction. So if we have a look at all those combinations, we can see that what we have in general is that you can either have a plosive or a voiceless fricative in front of an approximant with certain restrictions. Okay, so the restrictions with the plosives seems to be you can't get a p and a b in front of a w, you can't get a t and a d in front of a l, but k and g can go in front of any of the approximants. Thinking about that, what we've got is p and b are both bilabial, and w as an approximant is a bilabial approximant. T and d are alveolars, and l is an alveolar. So there seems to be a restriction on producing these things in the same place, or what is sometimes referred to as homorganic. Something is homorganic if it's produced in the same place. So p and b and w are homorganic phonemes. So what we seem to have then is a restriction with plosives that means that the place has to contrast. That is, you can't have the same, you can't have the homorganic approximant with plosive. So p and b can't go with w, but can go with a non-labial l or r, because there will be a contrast. Looking at the fricatives, there seems to be something else going on there, because basically the main restriction is that you can't have voiced fricatives. Given that the approximants are voiced themselves, then there seems to be, again, a kind of an enforced contrast. You can only have the voiceless fricatives going along with the voiced approximants. So there seems to be a requirement of contrastive voicing going on there with fricatives. There are other things, there are other restrictions that we could mention, but that'll do for now. Let's now look at some other two consonant clusters. Well, these seem to involve a particular sound, and that is the s. S, unlike any other consonant, can actually be followed by plosives or fricatives. So we can get sp as in spy, sv as in sphere, st as in stick, and sk as in screw. Actually, screw has got 3 in, but you can get sk words as well, as in sky, for example. Note, however, you can't get a s in front of a b, v, d, or g, i.e. the voiced versions of these plosives and fricatives. So again, there seems to be a voicing restriction going on here, in as much as sir must be followed by a voiceless plosive or fricative. And this time the restriction isn't one of contrast, that they have to be different. It seems that they have to be the same, given that sir is a voiceless fricative. It has to be followed by a voiceless plosive or fricative. So there is a voice assimilation condition there, that they must have the same voicing features. Another thing that s can come in front of that nothing else can is nasals. So you can get sm and sn words, as in smile and snack. Okay, so s can be followed by a nasal. Okay, well that about concludes what we can get in terms of two consonants in the onset. Let's move on to have a look at the three consonant clusters. Well, as we've seen, you can get s in front of voiceless plosives, so sp, st and sk. Combinations are fine, but you can also get voiceless plosives in front of non-homogenic approximants. So p can go in front of l or r, and t before w, and r, and k before w, l, and r. Okay, well, put those three things together, and it turns out that you can get all of those, well, almost all of them. So s in front of a voiceless plosive in front of a non-homogenic approximant. Then we're going to get spl and spr possibilities. We're going to get str possibilities. For some reason or other, we don't get the stw here, even though you can say tw, as in twig. You don't get any word stw, well, as in stwig isn't a possible word. That seems to be an anomaly, because you can do it with the k, with all three of the approximants. So you get squid, that's sk and w, and you get sclerosis, as in sk and l, and scream, as in sk and r. Okay, so it seems as though there is a fairly straightforward combination there, depending on what are allowed to combine in twos. Then you can also put them together in threes. So to summarize what we've just said then, the onset seems to have three basic positions. That first position is something which is can only be occupied by the s sound. Okay, so s has a kind of a privileged status, in as much as it can come in that very first position. In the second position, we've got plosives and fricatives, with certain restrictions on what else also contains inside the onset. And in that third position, we've got nasals and approximants. As I said, there are restrictions, so s, for example, imposes a restriction of voicing on the elements in that second position, in as much as if s appears, only voiceless plosives and fricatives can appear in that second position. And we've seen plosives impose a non-homogenic restriction on the approximants that follow it, and fricatives also impose voicing restrictions on the approximants that follow those. And there's also another restriction there to do with the fact that neither plosives nor fricatives can come in front of nasals, so it seems that non-nasals can't precede nasals in the second and third positions, but the s in the first position can precede a nasal. Anyway, the generality of this, as you can see here, is like this, that basically you get a s in the first position, you can get non-sonorant or minus sonorant consonants in that second position, and the plus sonorant elements in the third position, with certain restrictions on individual elements in those positions. Okay, moving on to have a look at the codas. It seems as though we've got a similar but somehow different restriction. So, for example, the l approximant can come in front of voiced and voiceless plosives, as in help, and bulb. It can come in front of voiced and voiceless fricatives like elf and shelve. Come in front of a th, as in health. No, there's no l in front of a the, but that's probably because the phoneme the has a very limited restriction anyway. So it's not surprising that you don't get that in consonant clusters in the coda. You can get l in front of a t and a d and a s and a z, as in welt and weld, else and eels. You can get it in front of a sh, but not a j, and again that's hardly surprising given that j itself is rather restricted in terms of its distribution. And you can get it in front of a k, elk, but not in front of a g. There's no ulg possibility of combinations. That's possibly because of some sort of like homorganic restriction there. Note g and ul, the version of l that you get in the coda is the velarized ul, the dark L, and g is a voiced velar sound, as is ul, a voiced velar sound. So there seems to be something preventing those two from being next to each other. Of the other approximants, we know that you don't get w or y in the coda anyway, so that's not going to be a possible combination. Now the r is limited because you only ever get r in coda with certain accents, but in those accents where they do allow the r in the coda, you get virtually exactly the same kinds of possibilities. You can get a r in front of a p or b, as in burp and curb, in front of a f and a v, as in surf and serve, in front of a th, as in earth, in front of a t, d, s, or z, flirt, word, hearse, and hers, and in front of a sh, harsh, and this time in front of both a k and a g, park and org. So it seems as though there's a fairly general situation here that you can get the approximants in front of both voiced and voiceless fricatives and plosives. With the nasals, you can get nasals in front of certain other consonants in the coda, but here there does seem to be more of a restriction, and I think we've already seen this in class last time, or maybe the time before, that there seems to be a place assimilation restriction on things, in as much as you can get a labial nasal in front of a labial plosive, as in amp, and you can get an alveolar nasal in front of an alveolar nasal, alveolar plosive or fricative, as in ants and hence and fans. And you can get a velar nasal in front of a velar plosive, k, as in crank. Okay. There are other restrictions to be seen there, but we won't go into them. Finally, along with those combinations, you can also get s and z at the end, so after the plosives and fricatives. So you can get a l, p, s, or a l, b, z, as in helps and bulbs. And the same with f and v, so elves and shelves, in front of a after a t and a d, as in welts and wields, and even after a k with a l in front of it, as in elks. No elgs this time. What seems to be going on there is, again, there's a voicing assimilation, in as much as following the voiceless versions of this you get a s, as in helps, elfs, welts and elks, and after the voiced one, as in bulbs, shelves and wields, you get the z one. So again, there's a restriction on voicing there, but you can get either s or z generally at the end of the coda in a 3 consonant cluster. So Looking at this in general terms then, we've got three positions. This time s and z go into the last position. The plosives and the fricatives occupy that middle position, and the nasals and the approximants at the first position. And if you think about it, that's more or less the mirror image of what's going on in the onset. Okay, with the onset, it was the nasals and approximants which came in the last position, and the s which came in the first position. Okay, so we've got almost a reversal of the restrictions applying to onsets as what applies to codas. Essentially, what we have is the plus sonorant elements can occupy that first position, and the minus sonorants occupy the middle position. Now, if we put all this together and have a look at the syllable structure, including all the possible things with the onset and the coda, we note that basically what we have is a kind of a sonorance restriction on things. Note that the nucleus is typically a vowel, and vowels are perhaps the most sonorant of the sounds in any language. So in the nucleus we have a high sonorance level. The sonorant consonants can also appear in the nucleus under certain circumstances. So the nucleus is the high point, as it were, for the sonorance of the syllable. And then as you get further away from the nucleus, you get less sonorant. Okay, so the thing in the onset which is closest to the nucleus is a sonorant, and the thing further away is a minus sonorant. And it's exactly the opposite in the coda. The place that's nearest to the nucleus, i.e. the first position, is sonorant, and the one that's furthest away is less sonorant. So basically what we seem to get is that the sonorance of the syllable increases towards the nucleus, and it decreases away from the nucleus. Okay, let's now consider some multi-syllabic words to see how they're put together. I've chosen two here, zebra and consist, as being two words with two syllables in them. And I've chosen these two to highlight a contrast that we see in how these words are syllabified, how you break them up into syllables. Well, with zebra, clearly there are two syllables. Most people can recognize there are two syllables there, basically because there are two vowels. And as we've seen, a vowel goes in the nucleus position. There's only one nucleus position in any syllable, so every time you get a vowel, you must have another syllable. So two vowels, two syllables here. The question is how we break those two syllables up with respect to the two consonants that come in between the two vowels. Now here are some possibilities. We could put the consonant break after the first vowel and have the two consonants b and r in the onset of the second one, and have zebra or zebra, depending on how you pronounce that word. Or you could put the break of the syllable in between the two consonants and have the b in the coda of the first syllable and the r in the onset of the second one. Or you could put the break after the two consonants and have both b and r in the coda of the first syllable and have no onset with the second syllable. Given that onsets are optional, it's a possibility. So which one of these is it? Which one's the way we syllabify this particular word? Well, if we look at it, we've got the first case has got a CV syllable followed by a CCV one. The second one has a CVC syllable followed by a CV one, and the third one has a CVCC followed by a V syllable. All of those are possible. Okay, all of them are possible syllables. So which one is the right one? Well, first of all, I think we can immediately get rid of that one there. Why? Well, because br isn't a possible coda. Br has an increasing sonorance moving away from the verb. So b is less sonorant than r because r is an approximant. And approximants are more sonorant than plosives. So you can't have a b in front of a r in the onset, so that's not a possible way to syllabify this. But looking at the other two, br is a possible onset. There we've got a less sonorant thing followed by a sonorant thing followed by the vowel, and that's an increasing sonorance, so that's possible. But zeb, r is also possible. B is a possible onset, and a possible coda, and r is a possible onset because those things can go in those positions. There's no restriction there. Let's leave it at that point and have a look at consist and see what's going on with this one. Okay, again, we've got the same possibilities. We can put the boundary of the syllable either in front of both of the consonants, in between the two, or after both of them, and then we get co and insist, or consist, or cons and ist. Okay, again, we can immediately rule out that first one this time, because there we've got a nasal preceding a fricative, given that nasals are sonorous and fricatives are non-sonorants. That is an increasing, a decreasing sonorance going towards the vowel, which you're not allowed to have. So we can't have an ns onset. But again, just like previously, you can have a n in the coda and the s in the onset, and you can have a n and the s in the coda. So ns is a perfectly possible coda. So which one of these is the correct one, given that both of these are possible? Well, if you ask a native speaker, they're going to tell you that it's zebra and consist. I think most of you will probably agree that consist isn't the way that you syllabify this word. You may not have necessarily been aware of the zebra case, but most native speakers will tell you it's zebra, the way we syllabify that word. So why is it those two? What's actually going on? Well, by way of an explanation for how to syllabify these words, it's been proposed that there is a general principle known as the maximal or maximize onset principle. And that says, put as much as possible material that you can into the onset. That is, if consonants will go into an onset and form a proper onset, then that's where to put them. Okay, given that br is a possible onset, then you put br and b and r into the onset, and you leave the coda of the first syllable empty. Okay, if you put the b in the coda of the first syllable, then you're not maximizing the following onset. Consist, on the other hand, is different because you can't put the n in the onset of the following syllable because n, s isn't a possible onset. That's already discounted. But you're not going to put both consonants into the coda and leave the onset empty. Okay, you want to maximize the onset, so you put the maximum number, which in this case is just the 1, into the onset, and you'll get consist. So that seems to be the general principle that governs how to syllabify words. Basically, if a set of consonants, if a cluster of consonants will form an onset, then make it an onset. If it can't, then split them up between the following onset and the preceding coda. Okay, quickly then to summarize what we've said. Consonant clusters tend to be more sonorant towards the nucleus and less sonorant as you move away from the nucleus, and that seems to be the major restriction on what we allow in consonant clusters in both onsets and codas. There are obviously other restrictions too, to do with voicing and place, contrasts and assimilations. With multi-syllabic words, then the idea is that we put as many consonants into the onset as we can, which is consistent with the principle above about being more sonorous towards the nucleus and less sonorous away from the nucleus. Okay, this is called the maximalize onset principle. So basically, if sonorance decreases between two vowels, put the more sonorant one in the coda and the first of the first syllable, and the less sonorant one in the onset of the second. But if the sonorance increases, put them both into the onset of the second. Okay, that's enough now, and I'll see you in class next week. Okay, bye-bye.